Welcome everybody to another great property meet, and today I'm joined by Bushra Mohammed, a solicitor, and we are in the Conveyancing Coffee Corner. Now, Bushra, thank you for joining us. Would you like to share with everybody a couple of things about yourself so that people know who you are, and then we'll explain what it is that we're going to share today?
Sure. Hi, Anne. Thanks for inviting me. So I am a property law solicitor and I specialize in commercial as well as residential property. My background is I've qualified as a solicitor back in 2006. I took a career break in 2012, and then beginning of this year I renewed my practicing certificate as it complemented my skills, having been I am also a property investor and developer too. So I have two hats on, as you probably can describe it, is that I have a legal hat, but also I have a property investor and developer hat, so I can advise clients that in their best interest in that sense.
Well, that's brilliant that you actually come from the perspective of a property investor. I know we've spoken about some transactions, some of yours and some of mine,
Yes.
over the past year. And it's been a really insightful conversation to actually find a solicitor who understands both sides of the fence and who gets what we as investors are trying to do. And I thought it would be a really good starting point to have an interview with you and to discuss what we should be looking for when we're buying a property at auction from a legal perspective, because we've done this a few times and you've helped a few of my clients. So today, what we're going to cover with you is what a legal pack should contain, what information you should give your solicitor and why, the risk versus price based on the information that's there, and what you should be paying attention to. And at the end of that, you will be able to make some informed decisions as to why you're buying at auction. So starting at the top, Bushra, an auction legal pack. We've all registered and expressed an interest, and we've downloaded the legal pack, and I think I'm not too far off the mark in saying what tends to happen is a seller will hold most of the information back until probably the day before, and then they'll upload it on the day before, or sometimes even on the morning of the auction.
Yeah, that's my big bugbear, Andrew. I hate it. So a lot of my clients come to me within possibly the last 48 hours before an auction date. And by then, majority of the documents are uploaded, which is good in that sense for me to do the title review for them. But it also, it narrows the time limit for me to quickly sort out my priorities and get that review done for them in time before the auction, so that they've got still enough time to read the legal pack and I can answer any questions. And also they've got to obviously in the background sort out any finance issues. But the legal pack, I've noticed more and more people are fortunately getting more educated on the importance of it. So gone are the days where people actually possibly didn't even read the legal pack or asking, what is that? And they just go to homes under the hammer scenario and just get a bit trigger happy bidding on something. Now, I think possibly after lockdown, they're getting a bit trigger happy on their laptops and just non-stop clicking away. And we're seeing these extortionate sold prices right now. Just yesterday or a couple of days ago, it was a lot that I wanted. You would not believe, Andrew, the guide price was 150k. Guess how much it got sold for? I'll tell you, Andrew. It was, you wouldn't be able to guess this. It was 1 million. 1 million. Look at your face. 1 million.
Did the auctioneer deliberately misguide it, or was that price a bit like an eBay?
I feel like phoning that auction house particular, I won't name them.
Yeah.
I'll phone them up and say, somebody really messed up, because I was really interested a lot, but it went a tad over my ceiling, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say, either they knew something or a couple of people knew something that you didn't know,
I know.
or somebody just completely messed up.
Well, I like to see it that I had possibly spotted a good one and somebody just had very deep pockets.
Yeah.
So who knows? Well, we'll find out. Maybe in 1 year's time, I'll go and drive past the place and see what's going on.
That is a great tip there. Follow up on previous lots that you've bid on to see what happened. I mean, before we dive into this, there was one which I was interested in purchasing in Birmingham this year, and it was 2 flats above a shop, typical commercial that I like to buy, and it was guided at 120, sold at 265. I was prepared to pay about 280, but I didn't buy. And the reason I didn't buy was there was an issue in the legal pack. And what I discovered when reviewing the legal pack was the tenancy, a new AST on the residential had been entered into, and it had been rented illegally. I'll explain why when we start to go through what's in a legal pack, but stay tuned and you'll find out exactly why that was a pig in a poke and why risk versus price, which we'll cover later in the session, is important as well. So, Bushra, help the audience to understand what's in a legal pack. We'll sort of deep dive the individual elements, probably in another video. So if you've not already, hit subscribe, stay tuned. Bushra would love it if you give her a big thumbs up and drop her a comment based on what you've learned and what you know. So, Bushra, what should be in a legal pack?
So in a legal pack, once you've downloaded it from your auction house, you'll see as many as 50 documents or 5 documents, but you need to make sure you get the office copy entry, which is the land registry entry of the title deed, basically, and it's the unique title number, and it has all the information of that property. Alongside that, you've got a plan, so you've got to read that thoroughly because that is the crux of everything about that property. So your restrictive covenants will be on there, any charges on that property will be on there, and any possibly bankruptcy notices as well. So those 2 documents are point number 1 that you must read. Secondly, are all the vast searches that might be carried out. So whether it's commercial or resi, you'll get your environmental, you'll get your water and drainage, local authority, plus you might even get a chancel search. But there will be other things that possibly that you might also get, for example, like a coal mining search. Only certain areas will get that as well. So you've got to read those in depth and make sure you understand if there's any effect on what your plans are in buying this property. After that, there will be other documents that might be related to the property for planning permission, whether any planning permission has been taken out for works to be done or any past planning permission. So you want to make sure that if there's works that have been carried out, they've been already accounted for, but you can also look that up on your local authority portal as well. Other documents might be a current AST or a tenancy agreement. So whether you're buying a commercial lot, you might have a tenancy above or behind the commercial premises, or if you're buying residential, it might already be tenanted. So you want to read that tenancy agreement and understand what kind of tenancy it is. You might also get a lease. So the lease might also be for a commercial tenant. So you want to know what kind of lease that is for your commercial premises and understand it under the Landlord and Tenant Act 1954, but it almost will always be a leasehold for a residential. So you need to understand what the term is of that lease, what the price is of the leasehold as well, and just generally the background to the person who's selling it and what kind of situation you're going to be facing when you buy that property.
So there's quite a lot of information to consider. And a little tip if you're a seller, the earlier you put this information out there, the more prospective bidders you will get and the higher price you are likely to achieve. Now, there's two things in auctions that I often come across. There's the common conditions of sale, and then there's the special conditions. Now, very briefly, what's the difference between the common conditions and the special conditions, and why have them? Why not just have one set of conditions?
Yeah, so the common conditions of the auction sale are the general conditions of what you sign up to when you bid at that property between yourself and the seller and also the auction house. So those are all the conditions, what your deposit will be, what time completion will be, and just general kind of contractual terms between you and the auction house as well as the seller. But the special conditions are what changes those common conditions. So often when I do title reports for clients, is those special conditions that might be a 1-page or 3-page document that you've got to really know and understand what those extra conditions are, because they can be the most onerous conditions that will put you off that lot completely. So, I mean, the most standard and common ones I've seen are that you pay for the seller searches. That's fine. You pay for the seller's listers fees, but this can vary between a few £100 or even a 4% charge of the premium. So now often you'll see those amounts in figures, in words, not figures. So if you're quick skim reading it, you might not notice it. The other one that is quite onerous is seeing that the seller can actually not complete after the auction, and you will have no recourse to getting your not deposit, your monies back possibly, or even any compensation. But basically they can decide not to complete after the exchange and you will have no recourse. So those are some of the conditions that I feel that you've got to be able to make sure you can take that risk.
Yeah, well, that will be bringing us nicely into risk versus price in a minute. Now, you've mentioned ASTs, and that is one of the things that you potentially look at. And I mentioned I was looking at an auction lot in Birmingham recently. Now, the reason it had been let on an illegal AST is in October 2020, a new AST was created with a brand new tenant on the property, and it was an EPC rating of F. Now, that is illegal to rent that property in that condition. I checked the EPC register. I requested information from the letting agent and from the auctioneer. Was there a more recent EPC? The answer was no, which my business is a member of a property redress scheme. And if I was to buy that and to continue the tenancy without taking immediate remedial action, there's a £4,000 fine and potential recourse from the tenant to me as well, taking on that risk. So to me, although I valued it and said it was worth 280 and it sold at 265, with that in place, all of a sudden the price that I was prepared to pay dropped significantly because of that. And you know, I've also seen auction lots where there's arrears, and the special conditions can override the standard conditions with regards to arrears. Standard conditions are generally you pay up to 4 months worth of arrears. Then between 4 and 12, it becomes the vendors, unless the special conditions override. So they're just little nutty things that you really need to pay attention to. So based on what's in the pack, Bushra, let's take a little bit of a look at the risk in buying a particular property versus the price we might pay based on the information that you would give to an investor. Now, as an investor yourself, we've looked at what's in the pack, but to me, you've said there could be up to 50 documents there. So it's actually probably more important what's not in the pack than what's actually in the pack. Would that be correct?
There have been times where I've reviewed a pack and there's been documents missing. For example, one of my clients, she didn't realize, but there was no water search done. So there was no way of knowing whether there was water mains connected to the property. And that was something that she would have to investigate behind the scenes as well, because that's something that you would have to put into your contingency, might be a few thousand, might be more, just to make sure that that's in place. If there's planning documents and there's been a huge extension work done, you'll need to make sure there's building regulation certificate. So it might not be included in the legal pack, but you will have to do some background research, go into the local authority portal, planning portal, and find all those extra documents. The other thing I've noticed quite a lot is when the seller has possibly passed away, sadly, and they don't always put the probate documents. So you need to be able to cover yourself and know who's that power of attorney. And if there is a power of attorney in the pack, make sure that's a valid one and it's quite up to date as well. So you need to understand that there is a risk that it might be a back-to-back sale, or if there is a person who's passed away, you need to understand that that person, even though they're on the title registry, they're not the person who's going to now be selling it. So it's just speaking to the auction house, make sure you do your due diligence as thorough as possible. Now, the thing with the auctions is you've got such a limited time frame to do all that research. And it's one of those things you've got to kind of just put everything aside, just focus on this, because when it comes to the day, you just want to be in the best position possible to confidently bid. It's just not just the legal pack. You'll be dealing with so many other kind of nuances. You might need to instruct a surveyor. You might need to obviously get some finances in place as well. So your mind will be kind of just speaking to a lot of different professionals, but it's one of those things that you've got to be prepared to spend that time on so that you're the most prepared in that auction house, really.
Brilliant advice. I mean, I picked up on something you said, which is sometimes you have to go and find the information yourself, such as the water search. It's often not that difficult to find that missing information. And sometimes information is missing just purely because the seller's solicitor's forgotten to upload it. That's not uncommon for that to happen. I've had ones where ASTs have been missing and leases have been missing. It's basically sold as seen.
Yes.
Now, I predict that's going to become more the case over 2021 and 2022 for the simple reason there will be a lot of businesses going into liquidation. There'll be a lot of repossessions coming, and the documents are not necessarily in the hands of the people who are controlling that sale.
Yep.
So there's things you can do, such as go and knock the door of the tenant, obviously in a COVID safe way, and say, hey, have you got the AST for this? If it's being managed by a letting agent, speak to the letting agent and explain your position. Speak to the vendor's solicitor, speak to the auctioneer. They will all provide the information if they have it. And I'm the sort of person who does go and knock doors because it gets you stuff other people don't get.
You have to be Mario. It's the Latin term is caveat emptor, buyer beware. It's your duty to be due diligent, do your research, because you can't in that scenario go back to the sellers and say you didn't disclose that information. It's your responsibility to ask the information. If they disclose wrong information, you can only go for them for misrepresentation. But at the end of the day, whatever is disclosed, you've got to read it. You've got to make the effort to research more. It's your duty to help yourself in that scenario.
Well, I think that is really sound advice there. And caveat emptor is a phrase that those who know me have heard me say many a time as well. Bit of Latin, buyer beware. Now, moving on to another area. What information should you give your solicitor when instructing them to review an auction legal pack? So this is sort of me. I approach you, Bushra, and I always say to you, hey, I'm looking to buy this property to secure some planning and then trade it back out. Or I'm looking to buy this title split off the residential from the commercial, put in an embedded capital allowances claim, and then transfer the property into a pension. So I sort of give you a brief, and I also discuss with you how I'm funding. Now, give me some examples of what you would absolutely ideally love from a client. If they were coming to you, what would make your life easy?
So first of all, come to me as soon as possible. It's one of those scenarios. Auctions, yes, I'm well aware that because there's such a small amount of time period to be able to review the auction, get everything done. But as soon as you speak to your solicitor, give them everything. Give them first of all, have a prepared folder of all your ID and all the documentation that you need, first of all, for your AML, anti-money laundering purposes. Yeah. Then you've got to have your proof of funds. You've got to make sure your lender, your principal lender, is in place. If you're getting bridging finance, make sure your solicitor is even on the panel, because even my firm, we're not on all the panels. So you've got to make sure that you understand that, okay, you might need to then instruct another firm to act for that lender in particular. The other thing is, make sure you tell me how you're going to purchase it. Is it cash, or are you going to get bridging? Are you going to get private finance? So that's something that I might need to speak to the investor's solicitor about as well, because if they want a charge on the property, I would have to then correspond with another firm of solicitors as well on that point. The other thing would be to also tell me, what are your plans to this property? Are you going to convert it into a HMO? Because then that's something that I will have to look at restricting covenants to make sure whether that's something that is not allowed as well. Are you going to do additional big dwelling planning uplift? Is it a ground up big build? Because I've seen documents that have overage rights on some lots. Overage rights are something that where the seller has a right to get a portion of the profit, that if you uplift the property, they will get a portion of that profit. So that's something that will then definitely affect your analysis of the whole lot. And you may then just come away and saying, actually, I don't want to buy that property anymore. I'm willing to pay you to realize that actually I don't want to fork out the £500,000 lot in the end at the property.
Well, I think that's a really good point there that you raise about the overage there on planning uplift. And to use a specific example of a case study that I was evaluating earlier this year, it was an ex-NHS building, and a developer had bought this building for what appeared to be a fair price. He'd then secured planning to uplift the site, and there was an overage. But the overage wasn't payable on development. It was payable on planning uplift, and then another overage on completion of development.
Wow.
And he was now looking to sell out because he'd been hit with a bill that he didn't realize he'd got coming, which was a planning uplift overage, even though we wanted to develop out. So knowing the minutiae and understanding the minutiae is really, really important. And it's also important if you're planning on refinancing at various points as well, to come off a bridge onto long-term finance.
Yes. So that's something that your solicitor will need to know, because you need to know whether the bridging finance and your new long-term lender is also on that solicitor's panel, because they need to understand whether the documents are okay to be able to go through that whole process. And then they just means that you can do the extra planning ahead as well, so that you've got all the documents, because they might be that I need to do ILAs as well for you, so the independent legal advice for you if you're doing a PG, a personal guarantee on the documents as well, if you're buying through a limited company as well. So there's so many other little nuances that I will have to make sure prepare well ahead, because there's only a 28-day usually time for your completion. So when obviously that's another thing, when you're reading your special conditions, make sure you know when completion day is. There's also sometimes a 14-day, but a lot of the ones nowadays are about 6 to 8 weeks because of COVID. they've extended quite a lot of the completion days.
Yeah. Well, I think what you've raised there is really important, and sometimes the auction close date can be extended again through things like TOGC, transfer of a going concern, and the VAT element on commercial lots, as an example. So that might be another area that you need to explore with your solicitor. If you're buying, say you're buying a Chinese takeaway, and you want to buy it as a TOGC, but the takeaway stopped trading, and you move an Indian takeaway in there, unfortunately, that's not a transfer of a going concern, and there's case law around it. So your solicitor would advise you correctly so that the transfer of a going concern doesn't apply, but you can get a time extension from the auctioneer or auction house if it's a TOGC. So it's bringing us up nicely to what advice we would share, what we as property investors ourselves, and you as a qualified solicitor, even though you wouldn't be a qualified solicitor if you hadn't qualified. So just for the record, what should people pay attention to if they're trying to read a legal pack themselves? I mean, what top tips would you give? I mean, to me, to give a bit of a starter for 10, I will look at the title plan and look at any, say, commercial leases, and make sure that the footprint of the commercial plan and the title plan of the freehold I'm purchasing match. And if there's any differences,
definitely,
who is controlling it and that sort of stuff.
So you bring a really good point. So one of the things I always put in my report is make sure your title plan matches your visual inspection. Now, one of my clients, he was bidding on a plot of land, literally the day before the auction. Just after I sent him the report, they uploaded another document and said, actually, the lot that you think is this red outline on the title plan, but you're going to be bidding on this blue outline of the title plan, which is actually just half of it. And it just changed his whole perspective on the lot. So definitely check your plans. Make sure you really go and view the property. Don't get too excited and think you'll just take that risk.
Yeah, obviously. Well, you obviously don't go and see these properties, so you're reliant on the bidder, your client, to do the eyes on.
Definitely. So I always, when I speak to my clients over the phone, I always tell them and ask them questions and say, have you viewed the property in person? And make sure you view it not just once, try and view it a second time, because you might see it in the daylight differently, or you might see it with another person, another professional, and you get a new perspective on that property as well. So obviously, once you've done that first initial inspection, read the documents. But if you don't understand the documents, or you don't understand the terminology, or you don't have the time, then do please go to speak to your solicitor and ask them to review it. The earlier, the better.
Yeah.
And if you're going to read it yourself, just take the time out. If it takes a few hours, it will take you maybe a few hours or more, so be it. But you might just, in the long run, save yourself tens of thousands of pounds. Read the office copy entry, understand what each section means. The first section is the proprietorship register, the property register. Then you will get the charges register. Understand what each section is. Understand the terminology is not easy as well in some sections. You might have to then, do some other research on another website to understand what the restrictive clauses mean, what some of the legal acts might contain in each section. Obviously, then when you go to the searches are a little bit more easier to understand. They're quite comprehensive in that sense. But certain points will be the local authority search, which you might want to take your time a bit more because you might want to do some additional research. Once you've done those two main documents and the searches, you're pretty much halfway there, I think. The other section would be reading any tenancy and leases. Now, leases, as you know, Andrew, they can be 10 pages or 50 pages.
Yeah.
So this is where your solicitor comes in and saves you a lot of time and hassle, and will read the document for you. And if it's, especially if it's a commercial lease, it's a bit more extensive, and you will need to understand what each term means, what the situation is on rent review, what the situation is on break clauses, whether the lease is even in the 1954 Act, which will have a huge knock-on effect on whether you can get rid of that existing tenant.
But not just if it's in the Act, if it's been opted out of the Act, was it opted out correctly? And it is all the relevant, what's the correct terminology, witnessed?
Whether it's contracted out,
yeah,
and it's been obviously witnessed and signed properly, but yes. So there's a lot of nuances in that, and only somebody who's specializes in commercial law or is experienced in that, like yourself, will understand all those terms and understand what their position would be, whether it's been contracted out, even small things like rent reviews, break clauses, what the term is, and then knowing who the parties are and whether they want to actually maybe even make contact with some of the parties to understand any other extra information they want to know.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really good. I mean, something which I always pay attention to in the title register is the covenants as well. And I remember we reviewed a legal pack for a bank purchase, and you talked about language sometimes not being easy. I think it was something like an 1890s title document, and it was oldie world English a little bit.
You have to squint your eyes sometimes, because some of these documents they might be the most beautiful calligraphy.
Yeah.
You have to really squint your eyes to read the document, then kind of modernize almost Shakespearean language to really understand how just 3 words might mean 2 or 3 things in the end. And you've got to know, well, okay, if that's a scenario, what does it mean for me as the owner? What will it mean for the current seller? Sorry.
Yeah.
And then just what your future plans will be as well. So you want to be able to future-proof yourself, whatever your plan might be, to uplift it, sell it on. You've got all the documents in place. You know whether you've got to get additional documents. So it might be that you're willing to spend the additional documents on getting surveys done, just to protect yourself as well at that same situation.
Well, I think that is a really brilliant overview of auction legal packs. Now, if you've enjoyed this session with Bushra, drop some comments below and tell her what you'd like to know more on, because Bushra has said if she gets enough comments, she will come back and deep dive specific parts of the legal process, coming at it both from an investor's point of view and from a legal point of view. And that is quite a unique perspective to be able to share both of those. And Bushra does both commercial and residential investments. So she wears multiple hats and can see this from many different aspects. And it isn't confused by some of the jargon that property investors might use either. We'll drop Bushra's comments in contact details, in the comments below. And we look forward to you joining us again on a future video. If you haven't already, subscribe, give Bushra a big thumbs up and don't forget to drop her a comment as well. Bushra, thank you from me. And are there any parting closing words you'd like to share?
No, thank you, Andrew. And just want to wish everyone happy bidding, and be cautious, be safe, and good luck.
Thank you, Bushra. It's been a pleasure having you, such a superstar, on our channel again this month.
Thank you, Andrew.
Catch up with you soon.